The most vocal cessationists of the Reformed brand are complementarian. And complementarians will point out that 1 Timothy 2:11 through 15 is a prescriptive text prohibiting women from serving as elders in the local church. And so complementarians will say that the burden of the egalitarian position is to demonstrate why 1 Timothy 2:11 through 15 isn't universally binding for all time on all women. They will recognize that attempts to refute this verse are usually approached through extra biblical means, or arguing from historical or cultural context, or through a deep examination of descriptive texts showcasing the presence of women leaders in the Bible or women speaking or preaching. Does something like cultural context or these descriptive texts convincingly undermine the prescriptive command? Complementarians would argue no and point out that in light of the prescriptive text, these are arguments from silence because you're drawing deeper inference than the descriptive texts are really saying. Here's the striking thing though. Cessationism follows the same interpretive logic as egalitarianism. As we've already covered, there are several prescriptive texts that clearly command how the sign gifts ought to be used regularly in the life of the local church. In response to this, cessationists use descriptive arguments, like the idea that there's an apparent decrease in the mention of the sign gifts in New Testament letters dated after 1 Corinthians, so that somehow indicates their cessation. Or the cluster argument, which is the idea that the miraculous mostly occurred in 3 eras in the biblical narrative. Or they'll use a historical argument, such as the idea that the miraculous declined after the last apostle died. These are all definitely arguments from silence. Now, the fact that somebody uses this interpretive method doesn't necessarily mean that something like cessationism or egalitarianism is wrong. But I point this out because cessationists tend to look down on this method of biblical interpretation when it comes to virtually any other topic. So if you're a cessationist and you use these types of arguments, then you have to at least acknowledge that egalitarianism is a biblically defensible viewpoint, even if you don't agree with it. Otherwise, you're being inconsistent when it comes to biblical interpretation.